Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the full moon in the second decan of Capricorn. Hope that you're having a wonderful afternoon. We're joining you on a Thursday as I'm recording this because we have a holiday coming up tomorrow. And yeah, I've got a personal holiday coming up too, so I'm going to be celebrating my birthday pretty soon. So I'd love to celebrate all of that with you. We're going to dive into the uh, all of the details of the full moon. We're going to look at the decans that the moon and the sun are moving through. We're going to look at all of the different aspects that are going to be perfecting around that period of time. We're going to talk a little bit about Uranus today. Uranus is moving into Gemini, and just prepare you for the week or two ahead here. So if you are joining me today, please leave me a comment here in the chat. I've got a few announcements before we dive into it, but I want to welcome all of you here today. We're talking full moon in Capricorn II. And the first thing I wanted to say is that, hey, my birthday's coming up, and I'm having a big sale. So if you want to participate in my birthday week celebration here, go get a discount. I'm going to give 25% off all of my digital recordings from now until Monday, July 7th, my birthday. And there's all sorts of good stuff in there. There's the Decan webinars that I do, all 12 Decan webinars. There is my Dignity and Devotion planetary webinars that I've been doing with my beautiful partner, Tanya Andrews. I've got another Stars and Cards webinar in there where I talk about the connection between the tarot and astrology. So check all that out. Enjoy 25% off, and hopefully it'll bring you some knowledge and wisdom and some joy so we can celebrate together. Also have a webinar coming up with my partner Tanya Andrews in the first week of August. We're going to be doing Saturn, the final planet in our 7 planetary webinar series, where we're going to be talking about Saturn this time. And we've been going through all of these 7 traditional planets and really kind of diving into all the mythology, all of the magical purposes, all of the dignities, all of the debilities, and how to work with that in your chart. So I hope that you'll join us for that Saturday, August the 9th. Make sure you check that out. You can find that on spencermichaud.com at the Book Now button. If you want to go find the birthday sale, you can click on spencermichaud.com and go to the store button. Of course, my beautiful partner Tanya Andrews has a wonderful magical business called Third Coast Mojo. She has an Etsy account where she's able to put all of her beautiful products up there. And here we have Saturn in Aquarius, which is, I think, probably useful around this period of time when Saturn is in a challenging position in Aries in its fall. This can help bring you some objectivity, bring you some structure into your life, especially if things feel a little chaotic at the moment. So go check that out and support her work over at Third Coast Mojo. If you want to know when I'm going live and you want a 10% discount on any of the services that I offer, you can sign up for my newsletter over at my website as well. That'll help you know when I'm going live, keep you updated on what's going on in the sky and what's going on over at Third Coast Mojo. And then finally today, if you want to support the work that I'm doing, you can purchase a super chat while I'm live here on YouTube, or you can go to the website buymeacoffee.com, which is a Patreon-like website that supports the channel and helps me to keep all the lights on, helps me purchase all the equipment and subscription services that I need to produce this show almost every week, 52 weeks a year. So I appreciate all of you who are able to contribute to that. And without further ado, let's dive in. All right, friends. So we have a full moon in Capricorn II. We're coming off of a new moon in Cancer that was very close to the Jupiter cazimi. And if you don't know what that means, Jupiter cazimi is when Jupiter is being renewed in the heart of the sun. So we're dealing with a renewal of Jupiter as we go forward through this lunar cycle. But we're also experiencing at the same time a malefic enclosure of Jupiter at the same time. So we're trying to start something new, but we've got a lot of pressure from the 2 malefic planets, Mars and Saturn, over the course of the entire month of July, which can feel like we have all the elements ready to give birth to something, but we either need to learn a new skill with Mars and Virgo potentially, or we just have some negative circumstances where maybe people are acting within their own self-interest rather than in the interest of the whole and the collective. So these are some other things we're going to have to look out for at this full moon. The moon, of course, is in its exile in Capricorn, a place that's not super comfortable, so we'll have to reckon with that a little bit. But Jupiter is co-present with the sun, so we do have a little bit of help, and we'll break this down in great detail. Javiera is here. Javiera, is that how I say it again? Correct me if I'm wrong. Nice to see you, friend. Says, hola, hope you had a good week off. Yeah, I had a little vacation here this past week. It was sort of a staycation where I was working on house projects and trying to build raised beds and things of that nature and do things in the yard and in the house. And we got some things done. I got a haircut. I don't know, my beautiful partner Tanya cut my hair, and I was able to, we cut each other's hair. It was a nice, beautiful moment. And, but it was very hot over the vacation, and it rained a lot. So that slowed our progress down a lot. But I had a nice visit with my family as well, one of the days during the vacation. So I'm feeling a little bit refreshed, but I don't know. There's just something in the air today. Like maybe it's the transition that we're experiencing with Uranus into Gemini soon, or even Venus at this kind of anaretic degree as we're recording this today, conjoining Uranus. There's just a little fatigue in the air today. I don't know if any of you are feeling that. Oh, thanks. I'm glad I got it right there, friend. I always want to pronounce things correctly. So if I'm saying anyone's name incorrectly, I want to feel free, please, to correct me. Javier says those are some of the best vacations. I agree. I think sometimes we feel like we have to cram all sorts of novel experiences into a vacation when what we really need is rest, and what we really need is to just take a time out and reset and recharge the battery, refill the well, whatever metaphor works for you in that regard. So in that regard, I definitely shook up my routine a little bit, and I think that's really good. One of the things, Javier, that I've been doing this week, or trying to re-engage with, is just setting and protecting just more time to read. I have a pretty giant library of books at this point. I'm the type of person, if anyone suggests a book to me, I'm going to just go get it. If I feel like that's like a sign from the universe that I need to read it. And I just need to sit down and really engage with that material. And this week I've been engaging with Liz Green's The Art of Stealing Fire, Uranus and the Horoscope, which is really excellent book for those of you who are Liz Green fans. You can see that. Really getting some great insights into the nature of Uranus. And as someone coming from maybe a traditional astrology background, getting her perspective, one that I really respect through the art of mythopoetics, has been really helpful. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit today too, because really the biggest kind of thing that's happening in the sky, it's not just the full moon, but Uranus changing signs is something that generally only happens around every 7 years or so. So it's a big shift in the sky. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this full moon, and we'll contextualize it with all of the rest. I'm going to bring this to the stage here, my chart, so that you can see that. Hopefully you can all see that. So our full moon that we're leading up to today is going to be on July 10th, a week from today, a week from Thursday, at 4:36 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time from my personal location. Make the adjustments for your location. We are going to be seeing this Mars coming into contact with the South Node. We've got the Sun in the second decan of Cancer, which has some associations with group dynamics and creating safe spaces for each other. Sorry, hold on one second. Excuse me. I had to sneeze for probably the last 2 or 3 minutes. Excuse me. All right, we're back. Excuse me. So we've got a square from Saturn and Neptune to this lunation by whole sign. And I've also been reviewing aspect theory through Demetra George's work in astrology, in ancient astrology and theory and practice. Sorry, I'll be able to spit the words out today. And talking a lot about how some of these planets, even if they're separating by degree aspect, they're still witnessing one another and giving testimony to that planet, or on the fate of a native, like in a courtroom, like the witness taking a stand. When we have these planets communicating with one another. I had a student I was working with this week where I was comparing a planet moving into a sign, especially maybe in a square, as like being like in rival houses in Harry Potter, for example. Like when Harry Potter enters into Gryffindor, Gryffindor is like the sign. Let's say Leo for this example, and Slytherin being the sign of Scorpio in our metaphor we're using. So even before Harry Potter, one of our planets, let's say he's the sun, and Draco Malfoy, let's call him Saturn in this chart, okay? Even before they enter into the sign themselves, there is this pre-existing relationship of tension between those two houses or organizations, right? Between Slytherin and Gryffindor. And when those planets come into those signs, they're sort of taking on some of those, maybe even some of those biases, right? So this relationship, even when they're not like having a direct confrontation, it still kind of exists in the background. And with this full moon in Capricorn, even though the moon is going to be separating from Saturn and Neptune, there still is this challenging energy between the moon and Saturn, between Jupiter and Saturn, between the sun and Saturn, and this kind of T-square relationship that we have between these three cardinal signs, Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer. So that's something that we have to be aware of as we're looking into how this full moon is going to come to fruition. We're in the middle of some big, political things that are happening this week. As I'm recording this, they're still trying to vote on a bill in Congress in the United States that could have really challenging repercussions for a lot of vulnerable people in this country. So, seeing all this happening and maybe even being able to contextualize it within that Saturn in Aries, maybe putting forth how can I put it? Well, I guess the easiest way to put it is a kleptocracy, right? A wealth grab from the more vulnerable people to give to the wealthier. So I think that this is one of the things that we're it's a big elephant or shadow in the room, that is putting a damper on the astrology moving forward from one particular perspective, I guess from my own perspective and perspective of many people out in the world. The moon in the second decan of Capricorn talks a little bit about trying to build something that what you could see as spiritual, but through material means. So we'll break that down in great detail. But this moon being hosted, or the sun being hosted by the moon in its exile, it's being hosted by a moon that's not in a place that it's super happy with. It's in a place that it's not being able to gain the resources that it would most enjoy. The moon is something that would nurture, that would support through abundance, through caring, through creating a sheltered, safe space, etc., through collecting light and collecting people together. When the moon's in Capricorn, sometimes we find ourselves in a hostile environment where we don't necessarily have the types of resources that we might enjoy to create abundance, to create nurturing, to create growth. So we're having this experience of having these two lights in opposition, with one of them being very up, like in a difficult spot, but trying to provide for the other, who is trying to utilize resources that are of potentially lower quality for its agenda. So a couple just big picture thoughts. The sun is in Cancer 2 with Jupiter. We'll talk about that in a second. I'll break that down. It's hosted by the moon at 18 degrees of Capricorn, opposite the sun. The moon in Capricorn 2 is in its exile, a place that it has difficulty providing the resources that it's most comfortable with. The host of the moon is Saturn, that is also in a difficult place in its fall in Aries. So not only is the moon in its exile, it's being hosted by a planet that is also kind of unhappy, that is uncomfortable, or in a place that's foreign to it, right? So we're trying to utilize these resources to carry out our agenda that are very foreign or maybe not of the highest quality potentially. And there's tension with the moon and its host. This full moon is also trine Mars by whole sign, so that we may be trying to utilize new skills to build something potentially. Like one example of this that has really come up with to me in the in this cycle is I've been trying to learn a lot of new skills, practical physical skills. Like over my vacation, quote unquote, I did a lot of woodworking. Actually, I should share more of these things on my social medias, but I'm kind of souring on social media a little bit, to be honest with you. I've been kind of feeling like, man, I don't want to wade into those waters that much, but I think it might be worthwhile to share a few of these things because we've been working on building cedar raised beds. And a lot of that has entailed learning how to use power tools and clamps and you know, power drills and all of these things. And these weren't skills that I grew up with. I grew up in a family of, I guess, intellectuals, of teachers and professors and things like that. And they had a different type of skill set. They had a different type of knowledge. I'm not holding one over the other. I think that there are so many beautiful types of intelligences out in the world. But that practical skill set was something that I've had to learn and come to later as an adult. And you could see that here with this Mars in Virgo putting some pressure on our desire to expand, right? I was talking about the malefic enclosure of Jupiter here. And you could see Mars is casting its ray on one side of Jupiter, while Saturn is casting its ray on the other, while there isn't a planet that is basically interceding, right? There's nothing that's really breaking that malefic enclosure up. So here's an example. Jupiter in Cancer, the exaltation of Jupiter, wanting to create growth, wanting to create abundance. In my case, wanting to plant a garden. Like I have a bunch of tomatoes and peppers, and I have all these seeds started, and they're starting to grow out of the tiny little pots that they're still in because I've been trying to build a larger structure to house them, right? And I'm finding that I lack the skills, Mars in Virgo, to carry that out. And I had to learn those skills, and that was making things much slower. Also, you know, here with the Saturn overcoming square to Jupiter, just the weather like didn't cooperate. Things that were bigger than me, that were out of my control, made it very difficult to make progress over the last week or so. It was getting into the high 90s with 90% humidity here, which is just awful. You know, high 90s is still hot enough, but when it's paired with that type of humidity, it just saps all your energy. And you know, and then all sorts of the social things that have been going on, and trying to navigate that, you know, intellectually, but also emotionally, it can be challenging too. When we're seeing all sorts of people suffering in the world and trying to figure out what we need to do to maybe alleviate some of that suffering, or even to just survive some of the changes and challenges that we're experiencing. So I think that's part of this full moon, this story, this malefic enclosure of Jupiter, where we've really been trying to create some kind of domestic, but maybe abundant, maybe growth, maybe nurturing. But we've had this pressure where we've had to learn new skills, and we've had these kind of more macrocosm issues that have been putting pressure on it. Now, the other thing I can say about the full moon here is when we talk about Capricorn II, we'll talk about the danger of hubris, right? The danger of trying to do too much, the danger of biting off more than you can chew, and trying to create some kind of ideal through physical means. And if I go back to my story of trying to create a garden in my yard, the ideal of creating home, the ideal of creating family, the idea of creating security, but through material means, sometimes can be a point of hubris, or a point of maybe where we don't necessarily have the vision that we require. Because security sometimes can be physical, parts of our security can be physical, but oftentimes security is much deeper than that. It can be emotional, can be intellectual, it can be spiritual. Uh, and sometimes, if you follow someone like Alan Watts, you start to learn the wisdom of insecurity, because life is always changing. And when we try to rely on something that is unchanging, that's when we set ourselves up for a great fall and for a great suffering. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Javiera says, oh, I'm so bad with that hubris you speak of. Yeah, Javier, we'll talk about that a little bit today, especially with Uranus. I want to spend some time on Uranus today because it's changing signs. And I've been doing a lot of reading on it. And basically the gist of the Uranian hubris is trying to be more godlike, right? Having an ideal of perfection that sort of kind of goes against the grain of nature. And that has really stuck out to me. So I talked about this a little bit the last time we were live, but stories like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the hubris of Dr. Frankenstein of trying to resurrect the dead, and how that created his own downfall. That was his hubris, that he could bring things back to life from the dead. And in his mind, he thought what he was doing was righteous, but it ended up kind of destroying him in the process. And it's the same thing that we get with humanity trying to attain some kind of perfect ideal, trying to steal a spark of fire, right? Like Prometheus, one of the kind of mythological syncretizations with Uranus, according to both Liz Green and Richard Tarnas. It is kind of this solar spark that we're trying to, this spark of the divine that we're trying to incorporate into this physical, instinctual world. And that can lead to dire consequences. Another really good example of this is the work of Michael Crichton. Crichton, I think that's how you say it. Jurassic Park, right? The author of Jurassic Park and the Andromeda Strain and other works of science fiction that warn of scientific hubris, right? Of saying, hey, we can create a better life through chemistry, through genetic engineering, things of that nature, or create entertainment with it. And then all of the chaos that ensues with that. A lot of times as human beings, we try to, we don't necessarily slow down enough to ask if we should when we see that we can do something, right? We see, oh, well, we can do this, but should we? Right? And we get lost in the sometimes the understandable enthusiasm that comes with invention, that comes with being able to shatter some of our crystallized realities through insight, through wisdom, through aspiring towards divinity and becoming godlike. But more often than not, it tends to blow up in our faces. And I think that anytime we are trying to aspire towards a universal ideal, there's often collateral damage in the everyday human life, the individual life. And I think that Liz Green makes this argument very well in her book. Uranus is not a personal planet. Uranus is a collective planet. And when we have planets like Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune espousing universal ideals, sometimes the people that suffer are individuals. It is not an individual planet. It is one that we're aspiring towards some kind of perfect, idealized version of something. And that is very much in the antithesis of like lunar consciousness, in her opinion, which is more personal, which is more physical. And I think we're seeing this in our collective right now too. If we talk a little bit about just some of the legislation that's being passed or potentially being passed. The people who are trying to pass it have an ideal in their mind. Liz Green makes a very good point of not mistaking Uranus for necessarily liberal or even, I don't know, progressive on some level. Sometimes it's just an ideal of perfection, and that ideal can be very subjective because it is ruled by the individual ego. So when people try to wield some kind of almost like Platonic form, but through their own individual hubristic, ego-based perspective, that's when we have some great tragedies that we see. Like, she gives the example of Adolf Hitler having Uranus on his ascendant, and some of the tragedies that he bespoke upon the world because of his idealism and his reaching for perfection, his hubris, and the suffering that that caused in so many individuals. So I think it's really important to understand that Uranus does not necessarily mean liberal, progressive, etc. It can be used in service of an ideal that can be wielded for great horror as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So big picture also, we have the full moon squared Saturn and Neptune. We talked about that a little bit. The pressures that we might feel to act in a certain way, that especially like the way that Saturn tends to attempt to create binding agreements. When Saturn is in Aries, the balance that Saturn enjoys in its exaltation in Libra is missing. The ability to see things from someone else's perspective is missing. Saturn in Aries sees things from one very subjective individual perspective, and that perspective can often be very self-centered. So a lot of the things that we're seeing that are attempts to create structure not only are in service of a handful of individuals, but are also, with the combination with Neptune, falling under an illusion, right? An illusion that radical independence will lead to some kind of salvation, which is a Neptunian concept, the desire to merge with the divine and to merge with divine substance on some level. You know, Robert Schmidt, one of my favorite Hellenistic astrologers, talks about Uranus as a transcendental sun, and I love that. And now I'm starting to understand that a little bit more, especially with the Promethean way of thinking of things, with the divine spark, the gift of fire that Prometheus tried to give to humanity, having that solar connotation, that divine spark of that solar flame. But he also describes Neptune as a transcendental moon, as universal substance. He calls Uranus the one mind, consciousness itself, right? Think about undifferentiated consciousness. And then Neptune being the substance that we work on with that consciousness to create. So this dissolving, this homogenization kind of feeling that we can get with Neptune can be present as well. So I'm going to check in with the chat here again. Javiera says, I always think I can do more, that my body, mind, and soul can take on. I overextend and exhaust myself and push people away. Yeah, Javiera, I wonder, do you have Uranus on an angle in your chart potentially, or conjoining one of your planets, personal planets? Because this is something that I've been kind of really meditating on with Uranus here, changing signs. Painted Turtle, what's up? How you doing? 7th generation vibration. How does doing this presently affect 7 generations from now? We've lost touch with the long run. We can't even seem to keep focus on the next generation's peace. Yeah, totally. And I'm not even sure that Uranus is long range vision anymore after this meditation and this reading of this Liz Green text. I think that it's this flash of Chokmah, she describes it as, if you're familiar with the Kabbalistic tree of life, this flash of awareness, insight, this little spark of inspiration that we could change something to be quote unquote more perfect, more to be better, to improve on something. And when we do that in defiance of nature or try to dominate nature, oftentimes that leads to disaster, right? That's the hubris that we talk about with the human tendency to want to dominate and control nature. So you can almost think of Uranian insight into a controlling influence. And when we're trying to control things, we're not always thinking about the long range. We're not thinking about the 7th generations. We're not looking at the long range vision. We're just thinking about, well, I see something now. I don't like how this is. I think it could be better. It could be more divine. It's imperfect. She has a beautiful story about the Uranus myth and how Uranus was the consort of Gaia, the earth. And, you know, Gaia gave birth to Kronos, Saturn, and Saturn in turn basically overthrew Uranus by severing his genitals, right? So one of the things that we see is in Uranus or Uranos, he hated his children. He gave birth to all the titans, like the big hideous monsters, the titans in Greek mythology. And I think he disliked them because they were imperfect. They were of the earth, right? And this is something that we see with heavy Uranus transits, conjunctions, etc., is somebody who has such a, I would say, distorted view of perfection that they can't abide by the diversity of nature, the beautiful, quote unquote, flaws that actually create this beautiful harmony, this beautiful overarching balance and homeostasis, right? It's really interesting stuff, and bringing up a lot of powerful reflections. Let's see. Javier says, does Neptune retrograde help with these illusions? I'm not sure. I would say that it may review some of them. I think that when a planet goes retrograde, oftentimes something that was given is taken back. So maybe when we see Neptune retrograde, maybe the collective delusion or illusion that people have fallen under may start to come up for review. That might start to come up for looking and seeing if that's actually helpful for the whole. So I think it's more of a reflection kind of thing. As far as helping with it, maybe. I think that self-reflection and collective reflection oftentimes leads to better outcomes. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we have right now in our leadership is the lack of self-reflection. You know, just for those of you who aren't familiar, the current president of the United States has Uranus co-president with his sun and is about to have a Uranus return. So all of this kind of what we're talking about with Uranian striving for some kind of ideal, when you're wielding that divine spark, but you aren't reflecting on whether it's actually good for individuals, all sorts of horrific things can be perpetrated. Lauren says, you explained the malefic enclosure of Jupiter perfectly. Yeah, Lauren. And I really am just feeling this in my own life, like especially with the needing to learn new skill sets to be able to create abundance, and then the frustration of maybe just not having all the resources and the collective support, whether it's from nature or from society. It really does feel like that is a pretty important part of this full moon. Sergey is here. What's up, Sergey? So speaking of Uranus changing signs, I'm 42, got Uranus at 0 degrees, 34 arc minutes of Sagittarius. So as Uranus changes into Gemini, it will start doing the Uranus opposition by sign as well as degree. Yeah, Sergey, welcome to your midlife crisis. That's what I will say. I just went through this, bud. So I am looking forward a little bit from Uranus leaving its opposition with my natal Uranus in Scorpio. But it just shakes up a lot of our preconceived notions about the world. Sometimes it can lead, I will just give you fair warning, sometimes it can lead to a dissatisfaction with the status quo in your life that can lead to some kind of hubristic manifestation. So, Sergey, the best advice I can give you as you start entering into your Uranus opposition is if you start to feel that restless Promethean energy, sometimes it can be good. Sometimes we get stuck in patterns that are not good for us, and we need a sort of a divine, I don't know, lightning bolt to the head to get out of it. But take a few beats and ask yourself, what if I'm searching for a divine ideal and my life doesn't look the way that I imagined it would when I was 15, 25, 30, etc. Are the changes that I'm trying to make right now, are they in service of some kind of ideal that is actually attainable? And will trying to pursue that ideal create collateral damage in my life? I think that's the biggest question to ask when we have Uranian transits is this vision hubristic? Is this going to have dire consequences for either ourselves, okay? Because in the Frankenstein story, basically it destroyed Dr. Frankenstein, the monster itself. It became so uncontrollable and chaotic that it destroyed him. Same thing, same exact thing with Jurassic Park. You had John Hammond trying to genetically engineer dinosaurs back from extinction, and eventually they ended up consuming him, right? And ending not only his vision, but his own life. So how can you ask yourself if the changes that you are feeling probably restless about, are they going to have ramifications for other people in your life? Are they going to be self-defeating even? Not all change is I think, a positive one. I know that really the only thing we can count on in life is change. And for us to endure, the hexagram 32 of the I-Ching talks about, to be able to endure in life, we do need to make changes. We need to flow with the changes in our life. But flowing with a change and actively forcing it are two different things. Adjusting to the changes that are needed in life is very different than saying, I'm going to make this change no matter what. Javier says, I have Uranus in the 12th in Capricorn, 3 degrees retrograde in my 12th is ruled by Sagittarius. Hopefully that helps your meditation on the subject. Yeah. Javier, well, I think you're also going to be, let's see, you're not quite there yet. You're a little younger, right? So you got a little time to figure out the Uranus opposition of the midlife crisis. But being almost on the other side of it, it definitely does shake up your life a little bit. I would say at the beginning of my Uranus opposition, I changed careers. I changed from being a professional musician full-time and a music teacher to doing this, to doing astrology, to doing my YouTube channel, to learning new skills and whatnot. Over the course of that time too, my family dynamic changed significantly. I had a daughter come live with me for her high school years, and then I had to also adjust to her moving out of the house and going to college and all of those challenges, and it's shaking up my identity as a parent, right? So there's a lot of identity shifts that can happen with that, I think. But Liz Green really makes a good argument for it being more of a universal, non-personal energy. Lauren says, Neptune will pull you back behind the curtain between the scenes of illusion. Yeah, I think up for review, like questioning whether we are falling under a collective delusion or not, right? With the retrograde, absolutely. Lauren says, Sergey, there's a maturation of the North Node at 42 degrees and 42 years in Vedic astrology, where your North Node house starts to operate more easily and add a flow. Well, that's cool to check that out. Sergey says, well, Uranus made good career changes when it spent time in my 10th. Good emotional repair, education, love of travel. Things when it was going through my 9th. So hoping for good things for the 11th. Yeah, Sergey, are we fellow Leo risings? Because I have Uranus moving into my 11th as well. Yeah. The other thing to say about this is, with all of the, I guess, somewhat Saturnine warnings that I put out about Uranus, to slow things down and really think about and reflect on things. You could maybe even call it lunar as well. A lot of astrology and the transits that we experience, our perspective makes all the difference. And our attitude coming to it, our ability to be resilient and to adjust and to ride the changes and the influences. Just because you're feeling an influence, a Uranian influence towards idealism, doesn't mean that you have to act on it, right? And sometimes when you do act on your idealism, good things can happen. It just depends, you know. I think to me, balance is the key. Um, I think that I really like the hexagram number 62. We talk about I-Ching today. The bird that flies too high loses its song is one of the things that is in relationship to that. And being able to focus on some of the details of our life without losing touch with the ground. I like to think of having one eye towards the sky and one foot on the ground, right? How do we ground this wisdom? Sort of like the nuthatch, if you're familiar with that bird. It's a little bird that climbs down the trunks of trees. How do we take that wisdom but ground it in the physical lived reality that we have so that we can live in harmony with heaven and earth, which is, you know, Uranus and Gaia were you know, lovers, but somehow there was this separation that happened between them. But how do we reunite them so that we can have a holistic experience rather than one of separation and duality and division? All right. So a couple other things as we are experiencing the full moon is Saturn's going to station retrograde during this period as well. So we've got Saturn kind of slowing way down to station retrograde in addition to Neptune. So we've been talking about Neptune's retrograde, but I think we're going to feel Saturn's retrograde even more on a personal and a potentially a collective level. A lot of the structures that have been tried to put in place are going to be up for review, are going to be up for maybe taking back something that was given. Maybe some of the legislation that has been passed might be taken back or reviewed or something of that nature. So that is something to keep in mind. And that's going to happen very shortly after the full moon. The other thing that we're seeing is Jupiter emerging as the morning star coming up. And I'll give you dates for this after we kind of dive into it. But you can see that Jupiter is separating from the sun after its cazimi. And a few days after the full moon, we'll have the emergence of Jupiter as the morning star when it comes outside of its degree of separation, where it becomes visible in the sky once again. This is an important moment. It's called a moment of phasis, a moment where we have an omen that speaks. Sometimes that omen is speaking much louder than other omens, right? So in this case, we're going to be seeing maybe the results of the seeds that were planted at the Jupiter cazimi. Now, one of the things that just comes to mind is we had that Jupiter cazimi around the time that we had our Mars-Uranus square, where we had the weekend where we had both the military parade in the United States and the No Kings protests. So that was the seed. And I think that we're going to see some manifestation of what seeds were planted when Jupiter emerges as the morning star. In our own personal lives, if we've planted any seeds in that regard, we might see something start to come to fruition. My hope in my own life, using the metaphors that I've been using, is that my garden will be planted by then. That all of the abundance I have sitting on my porch in tiny pots will be in my raised beds that I've built from hand myself in the ground, ready to grow and to provide sustenance. That's my hope, that by the time Jupiter emerges as the morning star, that starts to happen. But those are small little things. And we see this in the collective in bigger circumstances as well. Javier says, thank God, chill out, Saturn. Yeah, Saturn's been on one, right? And I don't know if it's very good. There's been a lot of collective suffering that has been happening. A lot of scapegoating, a lot of construction of edifices of hubris, right? You know, alligator Alcatraz. Like, what the fuck is that? You know, it's ridiculous. You know, it's one of those things where Saturn is building structures that are not in service of humanity, but in service of suffering in that case. So all of it, we can really look at Saturn's condition, right? And it being in its fall and in service of one particular very subjective viewpoint of the world rather than one that has benefit for multiple people. All right, a couple other things. Mercury is also preparing to station retrograde. Okay. So in this chart, Mercury isn't retrograde yet, but a few days after the full moon, Mercury will station retrograde at about 15 degrees of Leo. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that as Jupiter is emerging from under the beams, Mercury is going under the beams itself and then preparing for its own renewal in the heart of the sun in the sign of Leo later in the month. So preparing to review our communications, but especially our identity and how we express ourselves, and whether that expression is authentic or not. I think that the retrograde period for Mercury is going to be in the second decan of Leo, which expresses the desire to be acknowledged for who we are. Now, I often counsel clients to give yourself that recognition and release attachment to getting that validation from an external source. So we might be asking ourselves, who are we in these new circumstances? Who are we in this new world, this new social arrangement? Who are we in the resistance, the revolution? Who are we in the status quo? All of those questions we might need to ask ourselves as Mercury is preparing to station retrograde. And we may have some type of feeling of disconnect from getting recognition for the work that we're doing as well, because there's something that is cast into doubt, right? We may feel a little bit of doubt about who we are, and that's okay. Like, all of these things have their purpose in the grand scheme of things. It's good to reflect on who we are. It's to a degree, right? And I think that sometimes we have to take a hard look in the mirror to say, are we expressing ourselves externally? Or is that external expression a true reflection of who we really are internally? People express themselves in all sorts of ways that are out of alignment with how they really feel, who they really are, what their true identity is. And sometimes they do it consciously, sometimes they do it as a form of habit. Okay. And the closer that we can get to unification of our external expression and who we really are and what we really need internally, the less anxiety we're going to feel about the gap between those two things. And this is probably what we're going to see with Mercury retrograde, is how do we close that gap a little bit? All right. Sergey says that Mercury retrograde period is going to be strange, especially when it goes back direct. Yeah, Mercury retrograde, I mean, I think that the thing I've learned about that over the years studying astrology is it's not a super unique transit. You know, it gets a lot of publicity because of communication challenges, and it's sort of it's been accepted into pop culture a little bit, but it happens 3 times a year, every year. Mercury goes through these back and forth periods. It goes into the heart of the sun and is renewed. And it's not always necessarily a painful experience. Like, I have Mercury retrograde natally, and oftentimes what I will find is that sometimes people are on my wavelength, like this more self-reflective way, of thinking, instead of just moving forward at great speed, which Mercury often does when it's direct. It literally slows down when it is stationing retrograde and going into the heart of the sun. And there is this slower, more reflective quality to our communications, to our thought processes. And again, that can have benefits. It has its challenges, don't get me wrong. Sometimes getting the thought from my brain to my mouth is a real chore, okay? But oftentimes what comes out is much more well-formed, reflective, and impactful because I've taken the time to think about how it might land. Lauren says, same for the uniqueness of Mercury retrograde. I never noticed it. Yeah. I mean, I notice it, but I think that sometimes I don't know if it's something necessarily to fear, right? I don't think there are other aspects that I'm much more leery of than Mercury retrograde at this point. I will say that some of the traditional advices do hold. Back up your computer, make sure your car is running properly. This is what I tend to do so that I don't have a negative Mercury retrograde experience. I try to make sure that I'm doing all of that stuff before Mercury retrogrades, right before it, oftentimes. Like, I have some files I need to back up. I need a new external hard drive to back up all my computer files, and I'm going to be purchasing something like that this weekend. We took our car in to get an oil change and a headlight bulb replaced a week ago during our vacation, all in anticipation of that Mercury retrograde. Because sometimes when Mercury retrogrades and you're doing that kind of work, sometimes challenging things can happen. Like to make it practical, if you try to get your oil changed during Mercury retrograde, sometimes what they'll do is they will leave the cap off and the oil will evaporate or spill or something, and then you have a different problem. Like the repair person may not be doing everything necessary to make it a success. So, and it doesn't mean we don't do anything during these periods as well. It just means that we have to really check over everything with great detail. Sergey says, well, the reason I mention that is because it will oppose Pluto when going back direct and involve itself into that whole giant trine. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I hear you with that. The Mercury-Pluto opposition definitely could bring some collective messages that are painful and maybe are exposing corruption and things of that nature. So I think that is a good catch. And that's actually also going to be felt with the Sun opposition to Pluto that we have when the Sun enters Leo. Javier says, these endings of cycles have me feeling inspired. Yeah, I think that there is a way to view inspiration through change. If we don't feel like we're happy with our current circumstances, seeing a planet moving into a new sign or seeing a planet going through a renewal in the heart of the sun, it is a reason for hope. You know, I think that's one of the great benefits of astrology is knowing when, not only when a positive flowing transit could begin, but also knowing when a challenging time might end, right? Because that steels our heart. That helps us to ground ourselves and have faith that this isn't going to last forever. This too shall pass, right? So I feel you on that. Yeah, Lauren says that's a good point with Pluto opposition. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward too. Okay, so that's our Mercury retrograde. And then, you know, really the biggest thing that's happening over the next week or so is Uranus moving into Gemini. I've started talking about that a little bit in relationship to Liz Green, right? I've been reading Liz Green, The Art of Stealing Fire, Uranus in the Horoscope this week, and really recommitting to structured reading. Sometimes I would just kind of try to shoehorn reading in. And when you try to do that, at least when I try to do this, oftentimes there are distractions that come in that will take you away from what you want to be doing. And it's not that I haven't been reading. I've been reading a ton of Tolkien. I've been doing our Tolkien book club of reading that and research for that. But I'm trying to get back and refill the well of understanding with not only astrology, but with mythopoetics. I'm started to read a number of books about the interconnectedness of nature and things of that nature. I really enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass that I read last year. And yeah, I think I'm going to start Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life. I think that's the next one I'm going to start reading and incorporating in. But what I found is that as a creature of habit, as someone who has really entrenched routines, I have to incorporate that reading into my routine. So, and I have to do it before I get distracted by other things or people or whatever in my day. So I've added this to like the end of my, so I get up, I do my ritual prayer, I make my breakfast, I journal, get ready, and then I read. And I read for even just 45 minutes. Like I set a timer for 45 minutes. And often what happens is I'm like so into the book that I'm like, oh, let me do another 45 minutes. Let's do another one, you know? But then I know that and everything else I'm doing, even if it's just sort of the mundane, like, you know, as a self-employed freelancer, I'm sort of my own promo team. So I've got a lot of like mundane work that I do to produce this broadcast every week. And I know that I've already fed the part of myself that hungers for something new, for some new insight, that I can feel okay about sitting down and doing some of the more, you know, the more mundane, worky type things of the job. And I really highly recommend that to anyone who is doing creative work, or whether you're doing astrology or you're doing anything. Feed that part of yourself that wants to grow earlier in the day, and then you will not feel as much of the tension of having to like sit at the computer and do some of the more mundane things. That tension just gets released. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's also helping too, not to like just doom scroll first thing in the day, just to not get on the news app and be like, ugh, this sucks. Oh, jeez, I can't believe this crap, which is what I have been doing for the last few months. And it's really overwhelming. So if you start your day with like something that actually fills your mind and your heart and your spirit, rather than filling it with fear, crap, whatever, you'd be amazed at the difference that it makes. And I'm just feeling this as a Uranus, maybe even a Uranus going into Gemini type of manifestation. But we've talked about that. We'll talk about it a little bit more. Let's break down some of these kind of more granular details, unless you have some questions about Uranus. I do think that Uranus and Gemini in particular, I think that the distractions, the doubt that Gemini can produce is about to get ramped up by 1,000. And I think a lot of that can be seen through AI and that the use of technology, the hubris involved with Uranus moving into Gemini, the John Hammond Jurassic Park moment, is thinking that by creating more and more powerful technology that we can be more godlike. And at the end of the day, sometimes when we try to become more godlike, what it does is it takes us further and further from our humanity. And that, I think, is something that we have to really grapple with. And I'm somebody who doesn't think that being human is all that bad. I think that we can work. Here's the thing. If you take this a step further, the great illusion or delusion that we've fallen under as a Western civilization, okay? And this actually, part of this began around the discovery of Uranus, around Enlightenment, around the French Revolution, Enlightenment, etc., is the illusion that we are separate, that life and the earth is somehow separate from the divine. I mean, just sit with that for a minute. Just sit with that idea that God isn't somewhere out there. It's right here. It's right here. It's everywhere. It's right next to you. It is you. It's in the trees, it's in the animals, it's in the butterflies, it's in your neighbor, it's in your enemies, it's in your friends. It is all. And if you start to re-enchant your life in that way, this Uranian impulse to strive towards divinity starts to dissipate, because you are already perfect, right? You're already like the creation is already beautiful. We don't have to strive towards some illusion of perfection and create the collateral damage and suffering around that. We just have to align ourselves with the beauty of creation itself. And man, how liberating is that, right? And I highly encourage all of you to ask very strong questions about whether the new technologies that are coming out are actually going to produce benefit within your life, or that are going to bring you closer to what you consider divine or whatnot. And I say that with all the grim seriousness that I can muster, because one of the things that I'm really nervous about with the advent of artificial intelligence, and don't get me wrong, there's probably some amazing breakthroughs that it might help us with, but it also tends to atrophy the part of ourselves that is the creator. If we offload our creative intelligence onto an algorithm or a machine, that part of ourselves doesn't get worked out like a muscle. That part of ourselves says, you know what, I don't have to know how to write. I don't have to know how to draw. I don't have to know how to play an instrument. I don't have to know how to do anything because the machine will do it for me. And if you're thinking, well, that's going to free me up to do all of these other things, what's it going to free you up to do? What is going to make life worthwhile and meaningful when you've offloaded any creative act onto some kind of artificial machine? I mean, what do you become then? You become a vessel, I guess. It's sort of like Wall-E. Remember Wall-E? Like the people that were on the barge that just became just consumers. They were just they didn't have any spark of anything. They just consume. And then you just become like a vehicle for exploitation, for people who don't have your best interest in mind to exploit you, while also exploiting the resources of our planet. Because make no mistake, this technology is already starting to destroy the planet through its Wendigo greed of consumption of resources, energy, water, etc. So I think that there will be a desire to reach God through new forms of communication, through new technology, to be more godlike through those things. I would also offer that people who have heavy Gemini placements may fall under this delusion of that they are godlike. Think about that for a second, and think about that in context of American politics right now. Or if you have a Gemini heavy leader in your country, wherever you're joining me from today, and how that could lead to not only their own downfall, but the collateral damage of their communities, of the human individual. I don't know, just some things to think about. Some things I might be excited about potentially with this transit. I think it would be exciting to understand more of the natural world. I think if we could learn how to communicate with trees, animals, plants, insects, I think that'd be pretty cool. I think that we might not like what they have to say, to be honest with you. Can you imagine having a conversation with a 150-year-old blue whale and them coming and asking you, like, what the hell are you guys doing? You know, what I see all the things that you're doing here in the ocean. I've been here for, a century and a half, and I've seen all these changes happen. What's going on here? That it might be a little shocking. What if we were able to communicate with a 300-year-old oak tree? All the things that they've seen from the late 1700s on. And the questions that they might ask you, why are you doing this? It might change our mind and our place within society, or within the whole, I guess you could say. Lauren says, I've seen Uranus proposed as the Tower card in tarot, and I think the stress test is this. Have we built the Tower of Babel or the Tower of Pisa? I think that's a good insight. I can see the Tower with Uranus. Traditionally, the Tower card was associated with Mars. So I think that maybe even Mars has sort of a little bit of a Uranian flavor, or I guess Uranus might have a Mars flavor to it, right? If we think about it in a chronological way. I think Liz Green also makes that connection too, Lauren, of Uranus and the Tower card in tarot. So I think you're right. I think it can be this flash of insight, awareness, etc. I think that the association with Uranus and the Rider-Waite tarot was actually the Fool card. And I think that there's a lot of insight to be gleaned with that. Look at the Fool stepping off the edge of a cliff is he stepping off into a brave new world, quote unquote? If you know that story, there's all sorts of eugenic implications. Or is he stepping off the cliff into, he's stepping off a cliff to his own demise? I mean, both of them are challenging, right? Yeah, I think it's the kind of like the desire to go off on some kind of new adventure. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to go off on a new adventure. I think it's just balancing it with maturation and thinking about the morality behind it. Liz Green talks about the lack of morality in Uranus. Because it is such a universal energy, it's not concerned with individual morality. Individual morality is subjective, right? And we can have all sorts of arguments about what is moral and what isn't, but ultimately it comes down to a subjective perspective. Javier says, I'm very fascinated by this transit. Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see how it's going to turn out. We've been talking about, let's see, let me just make sure what I'm seeing on the screen is we've been talking about Uranus moving into Gemini a little bit. Cookerzilla, what's up, Cookerzilla? Says, hey, Spencer, how do you feel about tomorrow's Scorpio moon? Feels ominous. I haven't thought much about it, to be honest with you. I've thought about having a nice vacation with my partner and having a day off and maybe going out and having a walk in the woods. That's how I feel about it. I think that there's a Scorpio moon every month, and at the end of the day, like sometimes difficult feelings come up. Sometimes we are not necessarily able to feel the type of supportive emotions that would be that we might feel in like something like Taurus, right? Scorpio moons are an opportunity, though. I think it's opportunity to compost, to let go of some things, an opportunity to examine which forms in our life we've outgrown. I like Channy. I saw a reel by Channy Nicholas. She was talking about, sometimes when there's the need for change in our life, we don't have to get super upset about it. We could say, hey, I've outgrown this. And I think there's some real wisdom in that, saying, sometimes we've just outgrown something. And I think that's a real Scorpio wisdom, Cooker, is feeling like, hey, maybe we've outgrown this form and we need to compost and recycle this form and then liberate that energy, that animating spirit into a new form. I think that Scorpio becomes challenging when we try to hang on to a form that's past its prime. So the suffering that we experience sometimes with lunar Scorpio energy is oftentimes the lunar energy is trying to hold light. It's trying to hold form, right? And when it's moving through Scorpio, like let's say it's something moving through the house of Slytherin, right? But we were using this metaphor earlier about the signs as like houses in Harry Potter or whatever metaphor you want to use. Think about how when you're moving through a place that isn't really conducive to your innate nature, you feel a little uncomfortable. Like the house of Scorpio, the land of Scorpio, is not as supportive to the lunar desire to feel comfortable, to grow, to nurture. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't have its purpose, though. Lauren says, it's also worth noting that Uranus was discovered while it was in the sign of Gemini, as per Sergei's observation with this trine with Mercury. So was Pluto. Interesting. Yeah, so it's almost like a Uranus discovery return. Yeah, Liz Green talks a lot about the French Revolution and like how there was this idealism of human rights, which historically we look back at as a good thing. I can see the positive parts of that, but also the lived experience was also very bloody and violent. So there was collateral damage for the individual to progress some kind of universal ideal. And maybe she offers, maybe there was another outlet for that Uranian impulse. Maybe there was another form. I think that the revolutionary aspects of Uranus have to do with idealism. Any revolution is based on an ideal, all right? And when the ideal doesn't match reality, this is perfect. When Uranus, the sky, the heavenly part of the sky, is coming into contact with Gaia, the earth, the lived reality, and then rejecting its own children that are created from that, then we have a revolution. We have a rebellion. We say, this isn't as perfect as we can imagine. We need to create some sort of overthrow, right? And that impulse can have dire consequences. Not saying it's not necessary in certain in certain situations. I just think it's really important to think about not only the universal ideal, but the human cost of following our idealism. How do we reincorporate the earthy part into the heavenly idealism that Uranus can represent? Yeah, definitely good insights with this group here. Javier Painted Turtle's got a lot of good ones. Javier says, oh my, yes, I heard a horrible stat this morning. A certain company, every time you search, a bottle of water is used. Yeah, and we should keep talking about that. You know, Lauren brings that up a lot, you know, and for good reason. I think that we often incorporate a technology without thinking about its ramifications. And we probably should ask those questions before it becomes so entrenched that we are dependent upon it, which it is starting to become entrenched for many people. And they are becoming dependent on it. The other thing I will say to you is that new technologies like that, like anything, oftentimes they start off free. And then somebody tries to figure out how to monetize it and then exploit it. So if you're getting used to that service, it's not going to be free forever. Okay. And you're going to be so dependent on it that could have consequences in another way beyond just the environmental impact that is very real and very destructive. Lauren says, one good thing about the ingress chart for Uranus and Gemini is that its first contact is with Venus. Yeah, I think you're right. Harmonizing is a big signature for a whole 7 to 8 year pass through Gemini. You know, that's a good point, Lauren. And also the first aspect of the moon after this full moon is a trine with Venus. So yeah, we're gonna maybe see a Venusian element within this, and maybe it'll help us to think about our values. Oftentimes Venusian consciousness is, what do we value? So how do we be able to incorporate our personal values within this more universal type of idealism? Yeah, you're welcome, Cookerzilla. I'm glad you're here, and keep the questions coming. I love it. Okay, so I think we've talked a little bit about Uranus and Gemini here. So let's just talk a little bit about some of these decans. Before I do that, let's take a little stretch break. Stretch your legs. Get back into your body. We're very much in our heads right now. Get a drink of water. Get a drink of tea. I've got a matcha here. I love matcha tea. One of my favorites. And then do me a huge favor. Please like this video if you can. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Welcome if you're new. We usually go live about once a week, generally on Fridays. Sometimes we make little adjustments like we have today if there's a holiday or if there's something going on. Also, for those of you who may have joined late, we got a big sale going on right now. It's my birthday on Monday. My birthday is happening the day Uranus moves into Gemini. So my solar return has a 0-degree Gemini Uranus in it. And I just decided to share my gratitude for all of you and celebrate together. 25% off. You want to support, you know, what I do, but also get some information and go check out the store. There's also a link in the description of this chat, I guess, where you can click on store, and I've got all my Decan webinars there. I've got all my Dignity and Devotion Planetary webinars with Tanya, and there's another Tarot and Astrology webinar there for sale as well. So yeah, check that out. Take advantage of that if you are so inclined, and please to enjoy. Cookerzilla says, hey Spencer, how do you feel about the new moon in Cancer cycle kind of being sponsored by the Saturn and Aries Neptune square? Okay, let me parse that out. How do you feel about this new moon in Cancer kind of being sponsored by the Saturn and Aries, that Neptune Aries square? Well, we broke that down in quite a bit of detail in the new moon in Cancer live stream. So I would first point you towards that if you want to get greater detail about that. But I think that the challenge is that we have a desire in Cancer to make an expansive new start with Jupiter co-present, and we have a very powerful demiurge with Jupiter in Cancer. You know, a lot of ancient astrologers thought of Jupiter as the ability to beget many things into form and diversity of form. So we have this energy where Jupiter is really ready to give birth to something and to many things, and has a lot of potential. But like Charles Obert talks about in his 7 Classical Planet book, which is a really good book, by the way, Saturn is sort of the blueprint that Jupiter is drawing upon. And the blueprint that Jupiter has to draw upon at this new moon is the condition of it is less than ideal. So we have a really creative impulse right now, but what is being created is feeling a lot of pressure from this really negative social construct that we're experiencing, the authoritarian structure that we're experiencing in multiple parts of the world, right? So I think that a lot of the legislation, like Saturn, to me, has a lot of significations with legislation, because it's the fabric of society. It's the laws are the things that bind us together as communities. So a lot of the legislation that's being passed is in service of a very small amount of individuals. It's probably one of the greatest wealth grabs in at least United States history. Like the legislation that's trying to be passed this week is taking away from both elderly and disabled and poor people and giving it straight into the hands of not only the military industrial complex, but of the wealthy oligarch billionaire class. And that's, to me, part of that Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Aries, putting a lot of pressure. Now, the good, I don't know if there's good news, but the reaction to that we saw in the past few weeks when the new moon was happening was there was a massing of humanity in resistance to that, like the No Kings movement. And we can say that maybe something will be born that is very liberatory. Jupiter is Jupiter Zeus is the liberatory form that overthrows Saturn, Kronos, in myth. He's a liberatory force. He frees his consumed siblings. So I think there's a really powerful seed of overthrowing the old order that's being planted. But because of Saturn being in the overcoming position, the overcoming square, it is still in the driver's seat at this point. And the things that we can accomplish are limited by that in the short term. Long term, yeah. When people go to extremes, they are planting the seed of their opposites. When people go to extremes of oppression, they're planting the seeds of rebellion and revolution and liberation. So it just might take some time to play out. And we all might have an individual role to play, potentially. Lauren says, I like you in blue. Yeah, I've got kind of a blue for Jupiter. I tend to dress for the planetary day. So if you all see me in like the same shirt, it's because I have like a rotation of shirts of the same color. For Friday is Venus, so Venus is associated with green, or at least Taurus, Venus, green. Yeah, I could wear purple today, but I was just feeling blue. I think that there's some crossover with Jupiter with blue and purple. So yeah, thanks, appreciate it. I also got a haircut. I don't know if you noticed that. Tanya cut my hair. I feel good. I got it cut right before it got super hot, so I'm really grateful that that she did it, because I would have been super sweaty. Anyway, Javier says, this reminds me of something I heard about void moons, passing laws, etc., while folks are distracted. Yeah, I mean, everything is meant to be a distraction at this point, right? Think of all the things that have the current leadership in multiple countries have been trying to do to make people feel afraid, to make people fall in line and be complicit. All of the noise, a lot of that is a distraction from an enormous wealth grab that's happening behind the scenes. So yeah, don't be distracted by all that. Go read your books. Go work in your garden, but pay attention when it's time to act, to hopefully push back on some of this stuff. Wow is here. What's up? Says, happy upcoming birthday, dude. 7/7 is a big day for me as well. 16-year anniversary for me and my hubby being together. Oh, that's cool. Wow, happy anniversary. Yeah, it's thank you for the birthday wishes. It's gonna be my birthday on Monday the 7th, and I appreciate all of you hanging out with me today. It's sort of my birthday live stream, I guess. It's a little bit subdued, but that's okay. 16 years. That's awesome. I think my partner and I we've been together for 15 years now. So yeah, that's a good run. So congratulations, and thank you for being here today. Pain Turtle says, hair too? Tanya has skills. Is there anything she doesn't do? Queen energy. You're right on with that. If there's something that she puts her mind to, it's she's probably going to do it to the best of her ability, which is often excellent. So I got a really nice, here, I'll show you all if you really care that much. But oftentimes you probably don't always see what it looks like underneath the headphones here, but there you go. There you go. Did you get a little close-up of the dew? But I digress. Sergey says, ooh, that's interesting. My birthday is 8/8. Anyone with 9/9? Probably there are out there. It's nice having a double-digit birthday. Javier says, what's the saying? Behind any successful man is a powerful woman. Something like that. Yeah, I think behind any successful person, period, is a powerful support system. So I'm very, very fortunate to be in a relationship with a very beautiful, talented, kind person, like a loving, kind person. I think that's her superpower, is her kindness and her ability to care for people. She has Jupiter in Cancer, so I'm following her lead as far as how to create unity through kindness. Pantero says she did great. I cut her hair too, so if you see a picture of her anywhere, like I gave her, she has like a big like mohawk type thing now. Looks really cool. Looks really punk rock. I helped shave her sides up. She wanted it. That's what she asked for. So yeah, it was a big afternoon. It took a long time, but it's really nice when you have a partner that's willing to help you out with something like that. Okay, let's see. So what I'd like to do for the remaining time here, let's just talk a little bit more about these decans. Okay, so I'm going to bring this to the stage. This is my decans of Cancer. So we always start with the decans related to the sun, because when we're looking at lunations, think of the sun as like that, sort of similar to the Uranian spark, right? It is that divine will, that impulse, that consciousness. Okay, consciousness is a great word for both the sun and Uranus, in my opinion. So we're always trying to think about, what are we consciously trying to achieve? And with the sun in Cancer too, this is a sun that my natal sun is in, the decan that it's in. We're trying to achieve, I think, what Austin Cabot calls the walled garden, right? The Book T and Book Toth call it the Lord of Abundance. We've got this height of summer, this time when things should be growing and we're having great abundance, etc. It is a decan that is associated with celebrating, and especially not just with one individual, but with your community. I really enjoy doing these live streams each week because I get to celebrate with all of you each week and connect and things of that nature. But this decan has some things to do with maternal enclosure, safe spaces, and be able to create the environment that can promote healthy growth. Now, we talked about the square, the overcoming square from Saturn. Just if you'll indulge my gardening metaphor one more time, right now I have all sorts of plants, Jupiter and Cancer, okay, that are ready to, they want to grow, but they're constrained in smaller pots because I've been, every time I'm like, I should plant this in a bigger pot, I'm like, well, what I really want to do is finish constructing the raised beds. So there's been limitations based on the desire to create a new structure, but there's been all sorts of, delays with it. So right now, the plants aren't as abundant as they could be because of circumstances of trying to maybe learn something new, to bring something new, some new structure into being. Um, but again, there's always compromises we have in life. And the way that I've looked at it with the square with Saturn and Jupiter is we're creating some infrastructure. And maybe it isn't leading to as much abundance this year as it could in the future, but I think we still need to try to create some infrastructure, right? And then we have to think about it long term and how that's working out. Okay. So forged in the family fire. This one's interesting too. There's a spirit in this decan called Heracles or Hercules. And of course, Hercules is that great hero that had to go through the 12 labors to atone from committing, I believe, patricide. Like he was driven to madness by his mother, Hera, and he murdered his family basically. And he had to go through these 12 labors to atone for his mistakes or for his fall from grace, hubris, etc. But he was driven to that madness by his mother, like who wanted to punish her husband Zeus for stepping out on her. Hera is not actually his, I believe, his biological quote unquote mother, but there is a maternal relationship. So being tested by our families in some level is a Cancer 2 kind of thing. You can also think of this decan in relationship to a quest for immortality related to the fixed star Sirius at 14 degrees of Cancer. That fixed star heralded the return of fertility to the Nile River Valley and had some associations with the desire to become like the gods. You can also see this in the story of Achilles, like trying to make something divine, divine parentage, divine children, trying to protect something from war, right? Like Achilles' mother, Thetis, was trying to protect her son from going to battle, and the prophecy of him living a short life, but a life of chaos or glory. So, we have to think about how we're trying to aspire towards something. What are we aspiring towards? So asking yourself these questions can be helpful. What in your life is worth protecting? What are we fighting for? What are we trying to nurture? How can you create a safe space to promote healthy growth? How do you do that in your life? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it spiritual? Is it through creating community? This is something I've been really enjoying with Jupiter and Venus in both their exaltation and their home sign. I've been connecting with my neighbors a lot. We've been going on walks lately, but we've been just stopping and talking with neighbors for like hours at a time, which is, I really enjoy that. Like just connecting with local community is a great antidote to the fear and separation that we are being programmed to feel by the powers that be. Sometimes when you meet people that are different from you and you just talk about your experiences, all that xenophobia, all that like fear, all that whatever, it just fades away because you start to see the other person's humanity that's staring you right in the face. You only interact through ideals or through lumping people together into faceless, I don't know, numbers. You're going to miss out on the real human beings behind all of this. So how can you best appreciate the moment and share your abundance? This is another thing. Gratitude and sharing is something that I think is really important in this time of year. If you have more than you need, share it with your neighbor. That's a great way to create reciprocity. Are you owning your divinity or projecting it onto others? Really important, and it really calls back the story of Achilles, where Achilles' mother was trying to project some of her divinity onto her mortal son. And then finally, what connects you with timelessness? Or what is timeless? That's a interesting question to meditate on. What is timeless? I used to try to reach back to the primordial womb of timelessness through my music. And sometimes there was some beautiful manifestations through that. Other times it kept me from just creating and enjoying in the moment and capturing that moment. So I think when we are trying to connect with what is timeless, we have to be careful of feeling that we're just rejecting something that doesn't feel like it's going to be forever, or that it's not divine or whatnot. I think there's a secret perfectionism within Cancer that we don't talk about a lot. And it is that desire that to return back to that primordial womb, to have whatever comes out of us be divine. Javier says, yes, role reversals, whatever brings peace and strength. Yes, absolutely. So many different roles that we can play, even within our own relationships, right? All these different roles that we don't have to necessarily even be beholden to permanently. Roles can shift. They can always, they're fluid. And that's honestly, that's the way you make a relationship last over time. Is sometimes you have one person, like for example, is like a breadwinner or something like that, and the other person is maybe taking care of the family. Or sometimes you'll have one person that is more has more role in organizing the household. And you never know. I've seen these role reversals happen all the time. Like you could have an illness, you could have an injury, and automatically overnight roles reverse. So be fluid to endure is what hexagram 32 teaches us. All right. So now let's look a little bit at this moon and the Capricorn part of it. So we've talked about the desire to create a safe space, the desire to create a place where we can promote healthy growth and nurturing. Now, one of the keys of Hellenistic astrology is understanding the guest-host relationship, right? The ability to see how one planet is providing resources to another that is visiting its temple or its sign or its land or its house. And that's very important because we can make a lot of mistakes if we don't understand that concept. Now, in this case, the moon is in its opposite sign, in Saturn's domicile. You know, think about Saturn's time of year in the northern hemisphere is winter, where it's a difficult time. It's where things are not really growing; they're dormant. There's not a lot of light. There's darkness, and the material that we're trying to draw upon with this full moon is maybe of a challenging quality. Now, one of the things that I think that Cancer can be known for is trying to draw people in to their circle, right? To say, hey, I mean, this is what I do every week on this channel. Say, hey, come on in. You can be part of our group. You know, you're welcome here. You know, within reason, if you treat each other with kindness, you know, you are welcome. But in Capricorn, and Saturn says it is, sometimes it's exclusionary. It says, you know what? You are all on this side of this fence or wall or moat, and we are on this inside. And in Capricorn, it's like we're kind of prisoners of our own boundaries sometimes. In Aquarius, the Saturn Aquarius energy is like you find yourself as the outsider, on the outside of the castle walls, etc., on the fringe. So how do we avoid becoming victims of our own boundaries at this full moon? How do we avoid becoming prisoners of our own idealism, right? And it's funny that this is coming up. You know, there is a lot of associations with prisoners with Capricorn, and we've had a lot of things in the news about the giddy oligarchs describing their brand new shiny prisons in the middle of the Everglades. That's so disgusting. I just get so riled up about this now because just seeing the gleam in these folks' eyes as they describe their shiny new concentration camp is appalling. But in our own personal lives, how do we avoid that same kind of hubris of building a structure that we feel is going to create safety by excluding others? Do you see the tension between these two planets now? We have a desire, the sun, to create a safe space. Now think about this. America is a Cancer II sun, right? So this is a big full moon for America. Americans are always thinking about their security, their safety. That's all that you see in the news right now. Oh, security, we gotta. But they're doing it in a way that is exiling people and casting them into exile, right? Instead of drawing people in and saying, we will take care of you, they're saying, we will create safety by casting the people that we don't think are creating safety. We're going to cast them out. And it's happening in such a haphazard way, right? Maybe with Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, just like this, like, no due process, no ability to actually understand who is who and what is what. Just ledgers and numbers on a spreadsheet. It's very detached, right? So the danger that we have with the moon here is that we're trying to create safety and security, the desires of the sun in Cancer, through exile, through literally, this is what's so crazy about this. Astrology is so literal. In this card, the Three of Pentacles, we have people trying to build an ornate structure. All right, here's fucking Trump. There's a Ron DeSantis, and then there's who else is this fucker over here? I don't know, Stephen Miller. Like, they're all like talking about how do we build the best prison to hold anybody that we don't like, right? And this is the architectural designs of people who are trying to build an edifice to their spiritual ideal through material means, right? And through exclusion. So this is part of the danger that we have at this full moon. Like a decan that can represent architectural designs and blueprints. Now, this decan doesn't always have to be all bad, right? The challenge comes because the moon is extremely uncomfortable in this decan. This is Mars's exaltation decan. This is a decan that is Mars ruled, that says, hey, we got to toil and work very hard with all of this, right? And in this particular phase, we are thinking about how do we create structure. Now, the real people in this card, I don't know, not the real people, the metaphorical people in this card, you know, we've got the craftsman, the artisan, we have the clergy, and then we have the government official. And Capricorn II at its best represents the cooperation to build something, the cooperation needed to build structures between different facets of society. So if we kind of lean into that and see how we can work together to build something worthwhile rather than something that causes suffering, then we might be having a better manifestation of this. So themes of architectural designs and blueprints, ambitious projects, daunting tasks, gathering resources and support to manifest, limitation, castrating possibilities into form. That's interesting because Saturn had that sickle that castrated his father, Uranus. In Uranus was like unlimited possibilities. When you have idealistic forms, the possibilities are endless, right? He was a creation god, Uranus. And Saturn comes along and says, I'm going to castrate all of these possibilities into one physical manifestation, one form. Okay. Proper maintenance of body and mental health. I think this is interesting because we do have the spirit Hygeia in this decan, who's translates to health, basically. So when we're working on something difficult, we have to take care of our bodies and take care of our health. This decan can also represent the assembly line and the means of production. But again, the moon is uncomfortable here because we're trying to create safety and security through exile. All right. You know, I've been reflecting on this full moon through my garden experience. And sometimes I feel like, you know, Tanya and I, bless our ambitious hearts, but we bit off a little bit more than we could chew this season with trying to reshape our physical space too quickly. Like we took on like 4 projects when we really only had time for like 1 or 2. And sometimes we have to come to terms with that in our lives, that we have limitations that we're working within. Sometimes that limitation is time. Sometimes that limitation is money, resources. Sometimes it's help, right? Sometimes we feel like we can take on all these things individually when we actually need help. So questions you can ask yourself with the moon in Capricorn II coming to its fullness. What resources do you need to build? How can you gather support for your vision? Sometimes we feel like we have to do everything ourselves, and especially with Saturn hosting the moon, right? From Aries, we might have this delusion that we can do all this by ourselves. Is the plan in service of the self or the collective? A very good question to ask with Saturn in Aries, because Saturn is going to try to influence us to do things based on our own selfish desires without necessarily thinking of its effect on other people, which is manifested in Saturn's exaltation in Libra when it's at its best, at its strongest. Is this project practical or hubristic? I can tell you one project that's hubristic, and trying to build a prison with taxpayer money taking away from their Medicaid in the middle of a swamp is pretty hubristic. There's all sorts of horrible things that are going to go wrong with that project, not least of which is the suffering that it's going to create. Are you trying to build a Tower of Babel? Wouldn't it be beautiful if the divine somehow struck down that tower? We'll see. And finally, how can you take care of your body while you toil? Regardless of how this is manifesting in the collective, we all have our own hubristic moments. We all have our own towers of Babel that we're trying to construct. We're trying to reach a divine ideal through material means. And when we realize that that is literally impossible to do, or that the two are not separate, material and divine are not separate, that they are one, then the striving that we are trying to manifest or work through, we can release that. All right. So let me take you through just a few of the timings of how this is going to play out. So let's bring our second chart out. And what we're going to see is the first aspect, as we were discussing before, is a trine to Venus on the 12th of July. Here you see the moon at 8 degrees of Aquarius, trining Venus at 8 degrees of Gemini. Uranus will have already moved into Gemini by then, Monday, July the 7th. And we may have some really good ideas potentially. Hopefully we will have some ideas that will help us harmonize some of the tensions that we feel of our attention being split in a lot of different directions. Maybe we will be able to see a greater objective viewpoint potentially with the moon trining Venus. Then we have Saturn stationing retrograde on the 13th, the day after. You can see now in my chart that Saturn is red, which shows it in its retrograde motion. So being able to review some of our structures that have been built, review our own, maybe even our own independence and our striving towards independence, being able to kind of take our time and slow down our pace potentially a little bit, and maybe rebuild some things, even if we didn't succeed the first time, when we were having to rebuild again. On the 15th, Jupiter is going to emerge as the morning star. Okay, here you see a 15 degree of separation between the Sun and Jupiter. So this is the time when we're going to see probably some kind of manifestation of the seed that was planted at the Jupiter Cazimi right around the new moon in Cancer. So if there was a powerful seed that you planted around that new moon, you might be seeing a really powerful manifestation of that as Jupiter emerges from the beams. I would also encourage you to look at the Sagittarius and Pisces area of your chart and the topics associated with them for manifestations as well. When we get to the 17th, we have a last quarter moon. So here is the last quarter moon. I'm going to move the chart forward a few more hours just so you can see it. So here is the sun at 25 Cancer and the moon at 25 Aries. Those two decans, the third decan of Cancer has to do with scarcity versus surplus, feeling a little bit of I'm oversaturated with feelings. I'm oversaturated with food, with physical sensory information. And I don't want any more. I've had enough. And the third decan of Aries often speaks towards winning over a hostile crowd with your charisma. So maybe there is something in your life where you felt like you've had enough, and maybe you've had enough of trying to convince somebody of your perspective. And you say, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to let go of the need to try to create, I don't know, consensus through my humor, charisma, etc. So there's a little bit of tension with that. But I think being able to release our attachment to our individual vision so that we can maybe share some of our surpluses with those less fortunate might be part of this last quarter moon. Giving up some of our more selfish desires so that we can create a sense of community. Then we have Mercury stationing retrograde on the 18th. So here you see Mercury at 15 degrees. We broke this down quite a bit in the Astrology of July, if you want to go back and review that. But just a couple dates for you just to keep in mind. Mercury is going to station retrograde on the 18th. It goes under the beams of the sun on the 22nd. It has its cazimi on the 31st, and then it stations direct on August 11th. So that's your kind of unfolding of that Mercury synodic cycle. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the broadcast today, but this is reviewing our need for validation, reviewing our authenticity within certain situations. Sometimes we outgrow certain relationships, situations, friendships, places, and we have to review if the people and places that we're associating with are really helping us to become our true selves, or if we're having to put on a mask to perpetuate the old narrative. So something to think about with this. And yes, we are going to have that opposition again with Pluto. So our identities might come into conflict with some of the more collective actions that are happening, the corruptions being exposed within the collective. Mars will conjoin the South Node on the 20th. Right, so here you see Mars conjoining the South Node at 19 degrees of Virgo. This is one where we might have to let go of something. We might have to let go of a desire to bring spirit into matter. Maybe there's just something we just can't do this time around. Maybe there's we don't have the skills to do so, or we need to let go of fighting over the details. Right? I would look to the Aries and to the Scorpio areas of your chart to see where you might also be experiencing a purge. And here's the thing. I've started to respect Mars for its ability to create space in my life. Sometimes it's not always fun, but when we get bloated with too much, that can be its own type of pain and suffering. And I think I have a real healthy respect of Mars now for just clearing the decks, clearing the clutter, getting rid of things, getting us feeling uncomfortable enough to make positive changes in our life, hopefully. On the 22nd, the sun moves into Leo. So here you get the sun moving into Leo, moving into an opposition with Pluto. So normally Leo is kind of a nice sunny time of year, but now that it's opposing Pluto, there'll probably be some challenges around that period of time, especially with power structures and leadership of individual leadership desires versus the collective. I would anticipate more of the resistance that we saw launched at the No Kings movement, because in traditional astrology, you have Leo representing kind of kingly energy, but mostly the sun is a stand-in or a symbol or an archetype for a king. And when it's opposite to Pluto, that means that we have this this desires of one individual trying to assert their own power and running in face long into the needs of the collective. And that's going to create quite a bit of tension, especially when the leadership that we have is very intent on getting their own way instead of serving the people. That brings us to the new moon in Leo 1 at 2 degrees of Leo on the 24th. We'll talk about this in a live stream moving forward. You can see here you've got the new moon. Mercury will be retrograde and co-present. It'll be opposite Pluto. So even though we've got the Sun-Pluto opposition manifesting maybe a couple days before, we're going to really see the seeds planted of whatever bubbles up to the surface at the new moon on the 24th. So that's what I've got for you for this astrological breakdown of the full moon in Capricorn. We've gone in a little bit of different directions as well. We kind of broke down some of the Uranus energy moving into Gemini, and then some of the other aspects that are going to be perfecting, and some of the other transits that are going to be happening around there as well. I've got a couple more things before we go. Before you do, please do me a favor, like and subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, it's the easiest thing to do to support the channel is like the video. That helps us with the algorithm. I do have a hexagram for you before we go, and an animal. So the hexagram I have for you is number 55, which translates to abundance. And we have 3 changing lines within this, changing to the hexagram 52, which is keeping still. So abundance, number 55, translates to zenith, fullness, splendor, generosity, acting decisively, living in the present, making the most of the good times. They compare this hexagram to the sun at midday. And the judgment goes as forth. It says, abundance, success, the king approaches. Do not be sad. Be like the sun at midday. Jack Balkin says that the sun at noon will surely descend just as it has ascended. But in the meantime, it shines brightly, bestowing warmth and radiance on everything beneath it. In the same way, you now face a moment of rare brilliance and abundance. Everything is now possible. Relationships will flourish. Your ambitions can be achieved. Make the most of this time. Do not worry that things will not always be perfect. This will only cause you to freeze up. If you mourn what has not yet happened, you will waste your opportunity to do good in the present. Therefore, the text advises you to be like the sun at midday, joyous, powerful, energetic, generous, and happy. Size up the problems before you, weigh the circumstances objectively, and then go out and take care of business. Success is assured. It is your time to shine. So this is the original hexagram. It's saying kind of, this is your moment. This is a peak, a zenith moment. Think of like the midheaven as a zenith moment. Like, you know, it's eventually going to come down, but enjoy the moment while it lasts. Now, there are changing lines that are helping us to understand the nuance within this. The first changing line says, when one meets his lord and counterpart, they can be together 10 days, and there is no blame. Going forward brings esteem. Jack Balkins goes on to say, allying yourself with someone who has goals and values similar to yours will create a beneficial synergy. It sounds a lot like the values that we're seeing in Capricorn II with working together to build an ornate structure. Together, you can achieve something neither of you could do alone. It is not a mistake to work closely together for a specific purpose until you've achieved your goals. There's another changing line. There's 2 more. At the 4th place, it says, abundance is screened so completely that one can see the pole stars at noon. He meets a lord who is his equal. Good fortune. Your ability to advance has been blocked for some time now. Now at last you encounter the elements that you need to succeed. You are able to unite with people with similar aims who can help you make progress. Work with them. You may find that you have a complementary talent. Great drive and enthusiasm on one hand, shrewdness and sound judgment on the other. If you combine enthusiasm with wisdom and energy, wisdom and energy with prudence, together you can achieve great things. Prudence is the big word there. You know, if we have enthusiasm, but we don't have wisdom behind it, like this is what we've been talking about with Uranus and even with some of the building, the ornate structures with Capricorn. The building part of it is not the challenging part. The problem is when we are trying to build something that is in service of suffering, of making other people suffer. So we can build things if they have a proper use and value. Now, the other nuance with this is that oftentimes people think that they are, even when they are under great delusion, they think that they are trying to support some grand divine ideal. This is how all sorts of suffering has been perpetuated in the name of spirituality or organized religion in the past as well. So we really have to examine whether the ideal that we're trying to build in service of actually has value for the collective, or is the result of a hubristic subjective vision that could create suffering amongst our peers. And then finally, the top line says, abundance in his house. He screens off his family. He peers through the door, lonely, abandoned. For 3 years he sees no one. Misfortune. In line 6, the season of abundance has ended. The lesson is that times of plenty are destroyed when people become selfish and uncooperative. In their short-sightedness, they destroy the very conditions through which good fortune can be reproduced and sustained. Your desire for power and success has cut you off from other people. You have become arrogant and obstinate and obsessed with control. As a result, you have failed to share your blessings with others. Remember those who helped you in the past and be generous to those who are striving upward as you have strived before. If you insist on keeping everything for yourself, you will become completely isolated and will lose touch with other human beings. This will rob you of your most precious of all possessions. I think that's a warning for the oligarchs in the world, is if you become obsessed with power, control, and greed, and you try to build things that are only in service of perpetuation of your own wealth, that is going to make you isolated, that is going to make you lonely, and that is going to plant the seed of your undoing. The same is true in our personal lives. If we work to build things for only our own benefit, we are going to sacrifice the other types of wealth that we have in our life, which is relationships, which is health, which is time. But to me, wealth is multifaceted. And if you strive for one type of wealth, which in this case, it could be money and power, you do that at the expense of other types of wealth that are not necessarily replenishable if you sacrifice them. There isn't a way to get back the time that you've wasted in pursuit of a selfish monetary goal. There is no way to get back at some point the health that you've wasted for an entire life. There is sometimes no way to get back the relationships that you've sacrificed in pursuit of a hubristic goal. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't try. And if we've fallen short of the glory, and if we've made some of these mistakes and fallen under these delusions of power and wealth and of the difficult choices that being in a corrupt system sometimes forces us to conform to, there's always, I think, at least the ability to attempt to make changes in your life. And I think that at least trying is worthwhile. Even if you look around and you're like, oh man, I've kind of fucked up. I think that the ability to humble yourself and to try to make those changes, that's the work. That's when the work comes in. And that's really when the real spiritual lessons start to come in. Now this is changing the hexagram number 52, which translates to keeping still, mountain, restraint, being quiet, attaining inner peace, enduring, and taking one day at a time. The Book of Changes teaches that you must make both your activity and your rest in harmony with the needs of the situation and the demands of the time. Success comes not only from moving forward at the right time, but from also remaining still when it is appropriate to do so. The theme of this hexagram is recognizing that the time has come to be still, so that you can regain your balance and find peace. So this is interesting. Like the image in this is the mountain. I love the image of stillness. I mean, think about the endurance of a mountain through stillness. Think about the clarity that we create when we start becoming still, like a glass of water that has sediment in it, that we stop shaking. When we stop shaking that glass of water and we set it down and we let it be like the mountain, that sediment settles to the bottom when we can see clearly through that glass as a looking glass. And the same is true when we put down our agitating thoughts, when we put down our agitating attachments to drama, to fear, to perpetuating narratives that don't necessarily serve ourselves or the collective. then we can start to see clearly what really matters in our life. And I encourage you with this full moon to put down some of those things, put down some of those agitations, and try to be still like the mountain, so that you can start to see clearly in your life what is truly meaningful. All right. The animal I have for you is really interesting, considering all of the retrogrades. It's the salmon. Well, one of the features of the salmon is that it returns home after venturing far afield to the place of its birth to spawn. And I can really thinking about the combination of that Saturn retrograde, but also Jupiter in Cancer, as a part of this lunation, returning home. Like, how do we find our lost self? How do we, with this Mercury retrograde, with this Saturn retrograde, with the Neptune retrograde, how do we review and go back to our roots to be able to create fertility within our lives? Sometimes that's through simplification. Sometimes we make our lives too complicated. We make our projects too complicated. How do we get back to the roots and the foundations of what we're trying to achieve? Just something that's popping up in my mind. I like thinking about like gardening. Sometimes you just need a place to put some dirt and to plant your tomato. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. It just needs to be a container that's going to hold some dirt and let nature do its thing. And when we overcomplicate things through trying to make things too perfect, through aspiring towards some divine ideal, that's when we run into all these problems and run into all these challenges and all these anxieties. You know, one thing that Liz Green talks about with Uranus, as we've been talking about today, is Uranian anxiety. Uranus is a planet, I think, very much associated with anxiousness. It's very hard to relax when you always feel like something could be better. Well, what happens when we release the need for everything to be quote unquote better, and look around and appreciate the beauty of what is? It's not appropriate in every situation, but it is appropriate in a lot of situations. When we work with nature rather than against it, when we try to see ourselves as a part of the greater whole rather than seeing ourselves as someone who would try to control and dominate, that's when I think we're coming into alignment with a true mysticism. You know, I think having a mystical viewpoint of the world is almost the antithesis of Uranus. Uranus says, I want to control through my rational intellect. You know, mysticism says I surrender to the beauty of oneness. And maybe that's the antidote to all of this Uranian anxiety, and maybe the other anxiety that's coming through other parts of the chart and just through our lives in general. So how do we return home and find our roots? How do we find what really is meaningful to us? And then how do we create abundance and birth through that reconnection to what is truly meaningful in our lives? All right, my friends, that's what I've got for you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. We've got thank you, Javiera, for being here today. Says thank you for your time and knowledge. Much appreciated. Thank you for being here and for sharing all your wisdom together. Thank you, Sergey, for being here. Hang in there with that Uranus opposition. It's gonna be all right. We're gonna get through it together, friend. And then yeah, if you have any extra spare couch change, be sure to take advantage of the birthday sale. 25% off all the digital recordings right now as I'm putting this up here. Okay. All sorts of wisdom in there. Tanya and I and myself have poured a lot of our, energy, blood, sweat, and tears into this to try to create some kind of legacy to pass on, and just the legacy of information, the legacy of consolidating all, hopefully, wisdom into an easily digestible form. So you can find all that on my website, spencermichaud.com, on the store button. Hope you'll take advantage of that. I guess that I'll see you the next time. I'll be a year older, technically, and in a new Venus Time Lord after a Mars year. So maybe Venus is in my 11th house, so maybe we'll do some great things together as a community in a new Venusian 11th house Time Lord year for me. So hopefully we'll share in our abundance together and create something worthwhile. Thank you for the birthday wishes. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate you. Thank you, KWOW. Thank you, Javiera. Have a good one, friends. And I will see you the next time. I will see you hopefully next week. We're going to be, what are we talking about next week? We'll figure it out. I think we've got maybe the new moon in Leo, or maybe we're talking about the astrology of August already, potentially. We'll see. But be sure to be signed up on the email list so that you know when we're going live, and then you'll see what topics we'll have in store for you. So hang in there. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Take the time to reflect on whether what you're doing is in service of the collective, and whether it's in service of not only a divine ideal, but the individuals in your life as well. The real people that you meet every day is what you're striving for, worthwhile to them as well. Okay, friends, that's what I've got. Take care. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Peace.